Well, welcome to Christ in Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst and commentator. And today we're going to be dealing with a topic. Some of the events range back 5 years or so in the evangelical world, the evangelical conservative Bible believing Christian world in the United States, most specifically, and that is we're going to analyze three of the evangelical scandals that have occurred in the last 5 years in the, I would say, mainstream evangelical world. And we're going to look at three people, three men. We're going to be looking at Bill Hybels. We're going to be looking at Ravi Zacharias. And the last pastor is Joshua Harris, who was a pastor for a long time in Maryland, and then he basically gave up his faith in Christianity, supposedly. So we're going to look at him, and these three scandals are not in any way the same thing. They're dealing with different topics, different issues, different situations. We're going to talk about it because for some strange reason, the evangelical world, the Christian world in the United States here, doesn't want to talk about these men and doesn't want to talk about scandal. We're in an age of the seeker-sensitive marketing church model, and the way you deal with problems and the way you deal with scandals and the deal with the difficulties of messy church life is that you try to sweep it under the rug, you try to get it out of the news as quick as possible, and you don't want to bring it up ever again, because then that breaks the seeker-sensitive marketing positive reinforcement model that they have. In other words, we only give you positive news, we only give you positive teachings, we only give you positive atmosphere at church, and we design everything around positivity and encouragement and reinforcing the benefits of the Christian life. And we don't want to deal with the ugly mess of scandals and sin and all of those unpleasant things, so we just ignore it. And that's what the evangelical world has pretty much done in the case of these three men who are Christian leaders, who were Christian leaders, prominent Christian leaders in the church. So, and that's an unhealthy situation when you don't look back on what has taken place and say, what is it that actually went wrong in our churches? What is it that can be done? What can we learn from this? What can we avoid in the future? What safeguards can be put in place? How can we do better than this in the future? And that's what really hasn't taken place on any real widespread scale. It's just simply been, don't talk about Bill Hybels, especially around Willow Creek, because you're going to bring up a lot of hard feelings and you're going to bring up controversy, and then it might spill over in the wider community around the Chicagoland area. That's where Willow Creek Community Church is, in the suburbs, western suburbs of Chicago. Then it might spill into the mainstream press, and then the church might get bad publicity and might get a bad marketing image. And then they would have to then call in the marketing experts and the public relation firm and try to change that. So everything is done from a calculation of how is our positivity rating, how is our likability rating. It's all done in a very corporate way that a lot of CEOs and corporations do all the time. This is common practice in the business world, where you hire consultants to try to improve your image if it's bad. We recently saw, for example, Bud Light take a huge hit in its brand because of its wokeness. It's going overboard in trying to promote diversity, inclusion, equity, and all of that. And it just basically turned off a huge segment of its customer base, and it's suffering financially. It's huge, suffering losses because Bud Light decided to get politically correct and please the leftist radical fringe. And in the course of doing that, they basically alienated their basic customer base, and they're paying for it. Well, a lot of the marketing churches, the seeker-sensitive mega churches, They also follow the same marketing rules as corporate America. And one of the things is emphasize the negatives and overemphasize the positives. And so they're trying to forget about Bill Hybels. They're trying to forget about Ravi Zacharias, and they're trying to forget about Joshua Harris. Well, let's not forget about them. Let's learn from what actually took place. So let me get into a discussion as to what we can figure out, what happened, what went wrong, and what might be in the future that we can do that is better and to prevent this kind of stuff, because these are tragedies. These are men who have been highly used of God to lead people to Christ, who have taught people how to live the Christian life, who have authored books, wide best-selling books, great media presence on the internet, in the old days through tape ministries and through conference speaking. These are very highly influential men, and now they are essentially out of the battle. They're just totally gone from the scene. They're not influencing people anymore. In the case of Ravi Zacharias, he's gone on and died, but his legacy has been totally tarnished, and it's hurt a lot of people who really looked up to him as a role model, actually. So we'll get into that. But the first person I want to talk about is Bill Hybels. Bill Hybels was an innovator in the seeker-sensitive marketing church model, a mega church model. And he held conferences at his church there in the suburbs of Chicago, and thousands of pastors would flock to hear his wisdom. Well, he began, just only maybe 4 or 5 years ago, began to get accusations of sexual harassment, sort of predatory behavior. And he's a married man, and most of the charges against him, I think there were 10 or so known charges against him by women. This occurred also at the same time of the Me Too movement, the Brett Kavanaugh and that whole saga, and the Me Too movement, the Harvey Weinstein, and all of these, Bill Cosby. A lot of high-profile people were accused of women of things, and now 10 or so women accuse Bill Hybels of either being suggestive in his speech or his behavior, and then in one case, the last one, there was an accusation of outright immorality when he was a young pastor. This is going back 40 years ago. So that case is probably the most serious, and that's the one that I will basically put there as what pretty much sealed his fate. And what it was is that a young single woman who had been divorced, was allowed, I don't know why this happened, but Hybels and his wife agreed to rent this woman a room in their home to live as she worked at the church as a secretary or something like that. And then what she alleges in the New York Times and all over was that one night she performed some kind of sex act on Bill Hybels, and that was covered up for like decades and decades and decades until she finally told the New York Times. This is her story. Now, the thing is, Bill Hybels has denied it up and down. He says it never happened. So that puts the church at a dilemma, because now what, is this woman lying, or is the pastor of this big mega church, highly influential leader, best-selling author, conference speaker, just a huge influence in the Christian world, is he lying? Because there's no case for ambiguity here. Either this thing happened the way the woman said it was, or it didn't happen, and she's just outright flat lying, or he is outright flat lying. Now, it's been now 4 or 5 years since this whole thing. Bill Hybels has had to, of course, leave the church. They have a new pastor, and it's been about 4 or 5 years, and Bill Hybels has been nowhere to be seen. He hasn't even shown his face in public for like half a decade now, which raises questions. Why, if he's so innocent and there's nothing wrong in his actions, and he is this godly, upright, holy man like he's saying he is, then there should be no problem of him talking to people and being honest and open and transparent, but he has not been. He's been the very opposite of that. Now, the reason I would think he would say, coming from a marketing public relations perspective, like the megachurches are today mostly, is that, well, if I start answering questions and I sit down for interviews and I try to tell my story, it's going to open old wounds and it's going to hurt Willow Creek Church. And they're trying to recover from this whole big scandal where, like, all of the main leaders quit and attendance has dropped dramatically and giving is down. And they're trying to recover from this. And if I start opening up this old wound, it will then cause the church to suffer, as well as open up painful memories for a lot of Christians who have always looked up to Bill Hybels and seen him as sort of a role model or hero even. And so he's saying, it's better that I not talk. Well, it's not better ever in the Christian world for truth to go untold. So it's better that the Christian world go through the pain or ramifications of having someone either explain what actually happened or confess that they did, in fact, sin in this way and that they had been lying to cover up, and that they're sorry for this. There needs to be an open repentance on the part of Bill Hybels if he's guilty of this serious charge, or there needs to be an open and frank discussion by him and saying, I don't know why this woman is saying this, but it did not happen. And there needs to be an open and transparent process, and there really wasn't. So it's possible right now for some to believe that Bill Hybels is completely innocent, and it's possible for some to believe that he is totally guilty. And I myself didn't like the way he was treated and didn't like the way the accusation was he had to prove his innocence instead of her proving that he's guilty. And just the miscarriage of justice in the accusation. But then again, this is the way it takes place now after the Me Too movement. You almost have to prove your innocence rather than the person making the charges has to prove that you're guilty. And I didn't like that. But it's been 5 years, half a decade later, and we have not heard from Bill Hybels. He has not written his book and telling his side of the story. He has not confessed any sins. It's like he's just trying to wait this thing out and avoid being confronted and avoid repenting and avoid the embarrassment and humiliation. I think he's just trying to do that. So it looks pretty bad. So this was a situation of a simple, foolish act and then a cover-up of that foolish, sinful act. So we can understand Bill Hybels, young pastor, tempted, making stupid, foolish choices. I think that the decision to allow a single divorced woman to live in their home and to rent from them, and she's coming and going, and it's just, no, it's a bad situation. Somebody should have been able to say to Bill, don't even think about this situation. It looks bad, and it can come to no good. And yet he did, for supposedly financial reasons, they rented to her. So we can understand what happened to Bill Hybels. We can pretty much understand that he doesn't want to talk now because he's humiliated. His ministry is ruined. His credibility is shot. He lost the church that he built up from scratch. He lost all of his influence as a credible Christian leader. It's just a very sad, tragic situation, and we can understand this situation completely. And we need to make sure that these big megachurch pastors have proper accountability, and we need to have elders and council members who actually do hold the pastor accountable, and not just yes men, yes women who go along with whatever he says. We need to hold them to high standards. It says in the Bible, James, let not many of you be teachers, for you will be held to a higher standard, higher accountability. So that scandal, while it needs to be fully processed, and it hasn't been yet, and I think Bill Hybels would be the key to doing that, we can understand it. It makes sense. Now let's move to the second one, and it gets a little bit murkier here, and this is Ravi Zacharias. Now, Ravi Zacharias, this is very mysterious. Ravi Zacharias was a leading apologist, that is, someone who can explain the rational defense of the Christian faith. So you have all of these, for example, a new atheist, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, all of these atheists have, for the last 20 years, made an aggressive move against Christianity. They're not just saying, okay, well, you just believe what you want to believe, I'll believe. No, they're saying Christianity is harmful, it poisons everything, it distorts reality, it gives people a false hope, it gives people a false understanding of reality, and they are attacking the Christian faith. Well, Ravi Zacharias was one of the very few well-known Christian leaders who could actually go into these hostile situations like university campuses and actually debate the atheists, debate the professors who are skeptical and who are anti-Christian, and he could actually give answers. And he persuaded a lot of people to consider the Christian faith. He also wrote best-selling books on apologetics. He was a defender of the intellectual defense of the Christian faith, and he did a great service to the body of Christ. Now, his ministry began to grow because of his influence that would grow, and he got to the point before he died where he was bringing in millions of dollars from donations and churches to support his ministry of defending the Christian faith. And we can understand why. We're under attack by a lot of skeptical powers and forces today, governments even. We can think of the rise of the secular philosophy, and we need someone out in the trenches fighting for the Christian faith. So people supported him. Unfortunately, it was disclosed before he died a little bit, but even more after he died of cancer, just in the last 3 years, that he had been carrying on in immoral acts with women who worked at his massage parlors. Now, this is even stranger. He was a Christian leader, an apologist, and best-selling author and well-known conference speaker. But with some of his financial gains, he bought a health spa, supposedly to help because he had a bad back and he needed to have someone massage him and loosen up his muscles, and it kept him from pain, supposedly. That's the story. And so he hired women, even from distant countries, in Asia, for example, and so forth, and they would work on his back. And he actually had a massage therapist woman go with him, travel with him in different places. So, but the problem was that it wasn't just massages. He was actually getting sexual favors from these women, and he was traveling all over the world and having different women give him sexual favors in different countries. And it was just an immoral mess. And he knew it was wrong, and everybody around him who hears about it knows that it's wrong. And the big question is, why? Why would a leading Christian apologist, speaker, spokesman for the faith, go against the principles of what he was teaching? Why would anyone want to do that or continue to do that? We can understand, like the Bill Hybels, this momentary insanity, this foolishness. We can, like King David, makes a stupid mistake and then repents. And I'm sure Bill Hybels has grieved many times privately for that stupid, foolish mistake he made, that sinful error of judgment. But Ravi Zacharias, it wasn't a one-time thing. It was a continuous cover-up of immorality over years and years, and perhaps even decades. We don't know how far back it goes. Now, the question is, was Ravi Zacharias a scam artist, a grifter in the Christian world from the very beginning, living inconsistently from the get-go? Or was this something that happened in the course of his ministry? Maybe it got too big, it went to his head, the money corrupted him, the influence corrupted him, people looking up to him. He felt he was above reproach and he could do anything he wanted to, and that even these indiscretions and sins, he felt he deserved it because of the hard work. I don't know what was going on in his head. It's a big mystery, and it really needs to be uncovered. I really do hope someone sits down, a journalist sits down and takes the time to write a book and tries to make sense of this, because right now it does not make very much sense. It doesn't make much sense. My theory is that he wasn't a grifter from the get-go. He wasn't a flim-flam con artist just using evangelical Christianity to ingratiate himself with riches and travel and prestige. I think he really started sincere, but the devil got to him. The demonic forces of evil got to him and turned him corrupt. And he did not fight back, and he allowed this corruption to grow. And so he died, a corrupt, immoral sinner. And that's the best that I can understand what happened to him. And of course, again, a lack of accountability. Here's this big leader that doesn't have much accountability. But but we really do need a lot of investigative journalism to try to figure out what in the world happened and piece this together so we can avoid something like this again, or at least make efforts to have these people accountable. Now, the third is Joshua Harris, and he is the most strange case of all. Here's a man who has endorsed all kinds of evangelical books, and he himself has written a lot of different evangelical Christian books, very solid theologically, very reasonable, very mature young man who gained fame very early in his early 20s, I think it was, when he wrote I Kissed Dating Goodbye, started a really good conversation about purity in dating in Christian singles. Very good conversation. And his books were endorsed by just leading voices in evangelicalism. And he was being interviewed by the likes of, say, James Dobson on Focus on the Family. I've heard him on there. I think James Dobson spent 2 or 3 programs with Joshua Harris and was very impressed with his answers and his maturity as a young man in his 20s and then a pastor in his 30s. And people around the world that knew of him really looked highly of him as almost a model of how a young man can keep his way pure and walk the straight walk of God's will. And he really seemed to have everything going for him. And then he and his wife made an announcement that they were going to separate, and then they made an announcement that they were divorcing. And not only that, Joshua Harris announces that he's leaving the Christian faith. He's, quote, deconstructing, as the term is today. And he says, I'm no longer a Christian. I no longer believe. Now, this is totally and utterly bizarre. This is totally a mystery. What in the world is taking place with someone who is a solid, mature, sane, not one of these crazy, flamboyant leaders that you might see on TV or hear on radio, or do things just to get a name for himself. He was seemingly a solid, respectable Christian leader who would put out a book every year or so that really had good content. I mean, even practical theology books that would talk about you need to make a commitment to a group of Christians and live with those Christians in fellowship, in a solid church, local church, and just good, solid advice. He'd get the endorsement of the really big, influential voices in Christianity would all endorse his books. and he was highly respected as a up-and-coming young leader in the evangelical world, and then he announces he's deconstructed. He's no longer a Christian. So what in the world happened? Well, I think possibly, and again, someone needs to really do the hard legwork and do the research and try to write a book about Joshua Harris and really explain how this could happen and what happened actually. But as I understand what I have read, um, his early writings and his early interviews and his early speaking, he said everything perfect. He did everything perfect. He was this almost too ideal a testimony, too ideal a leader. It was almost too good to be true. He was saying all the right things at all the right times and putting forth the right image. But the question is, was he actually playing the role or playing the part of a Christian, saying what he was supposed to say, saying what was expected of him to say, articulating positions in theology and articulating positions on morality that he was told and taught to say as a youngster, and he was just being a good boy and going ahead and just saying those things and behaving that way because that's what he was told to say and behave with, and it wasn't from his heart. So my theory is that his parents were really influential in the homeschooling movement, and so he began to speak and write coming out of that, and they were highly influential, and so he was able to have a platform early, and so he realized that if he just walked the straight and narrow path of evangelical Christianity, it would not only be good for his reputation, but he would actually be able to speak at conferences and he could write best-selling books. And it just opened up a whole world financially and socially for him. And so he just went through that door because that was the easiest door that he could go through. But it wasn't that he had these strong convictions in and of himself and that he would die for Christ totally apart from all of the rewards and the opportunities that it gave him. And I think this was the same situation with Frankie Schaeffer, Francis Schaeffer, the late theologian, evangelical theologian. Frankie Schaeffer has done something similar where here is this Frankie Schaeffer, he is just on fire and he is writing books and he's producing movies and he's speaking at conferences and doing so much for the kingdom of God. But it's more like he's just carrying on the legacy of his father. And he did not have that heart conviction, evidently. He did not have that rock solid faith in and of himself, apart from his family, apart from the evangelical community, apart from his movies and books in the Christian world. He had not owned the faith himself. And I think that's what happened to Joshua Harris. But again, there needs to be a lot of research in this area. I do hope that someone at some point actually does write a book about some of these individuals I just talked about, especially Joshua Harris and Ravi Zacharias, and even Frankie Schaeffer, or he goes by Frank today. We really need to learn more about this. Well, I hope that's been helpful. We'll see you back next week. God bless.